I'm Jeremy Hobson. This is the follow-up from the middle, and if you're catching us for the first time, we do this every week, bringing more of your voices into the conversation on topics like the economy, healthcare, AI, the war in Iran. Just hit follow, and of course, if you're a Spotify Premium member, you get this show with no ads. So we are following up today on our show about sports, gambling, online betting, prediction markets, which have gotten really big over the past few years. A wave of state-by-state legislation has made betting faster, easier, a lot more accessible, especially on your phone. And as it becomes more popular, there are some concerns growing about what this level of easy access to gambling means for society and how, if at all, it should be regulated. So let's welcome our guest, Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey, who's been covering this issue and joined us on the live show. Nathan, good to have you back.
Good to be here.
Well, and as you remember, we heard from a mom whose son was addicted to gambling. We heard from a woman who got divorced from her husband who was addicted to gambling. And then we got this voicemail from a grandmother. Listen.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I am against sports gambling. My grandson got horribly addicted to that, and it has almost been the ruin of him. And the family members have to chip in and bear the brunt of a lot of that destruction that it has caused. So I'm not for it.
Nathan, it does make you think a little bit about like secondhand smoke in that it affects other people. And a gambling addiction can do that too. And yet it seems like the regulations are melting away rather than being added.
Well, we are in this real significant transition period, it seems, because, of course, before 2018, the Supreme Court allowed states to start legalizing sports gambling. It was really only something you could do in Nevada. Then all of a sudden, the states had a choice to do it. A lot of them started to do it on their own. That was basically regulated sports books. But now we're seeing the advent of these prediction markets, which allowed people to, quote unquote, trade on sports, if you accept that nomenclature. And that has taken this to a new level. And so I think there are serious questions about, the societal effects of this, because, you mentioned smoking. Well, cigarettes is something that Americans have allowed to exist for, allowed people to do for many decades, but we also realize that it's deadly. And so are questions about how much should we allow addictive behaviors, and, the government taxes these things, makes money off of it. And are we investing enough in public health to make sure that we help people who need it?
And how much is the current government, the Trump administration, pushing the, legalization of gambling or against regulations right now? Because we do know that Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, is he's an advisor to Kalshi and an advisor to Polymarket as well.
Yeah, so the president's son has a vested interest in the success of prediction markets, and certainly critics have said that they believe that is fueling the Trump administration's approach to regulating this, because right now it's basically this very obscure agency that most people did not pay attention to before this, called the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, which is a federal organization that oversees these swaps and derivatives, things that people maybe didn't care that much about before. But all of a sudden, essentially what's happening is prediction markets are saying we should be federally regulated under this CFTC exchange law, and not regulated by the state gaming commissions, which oversee like DraftKings and FanDuel and the other sports books in those states. And so they're sort of viewing this in some ways as a legal loophole to allow them to go national, which is something that they couldn't do before.
Is that something you think that's going to end up in the courts? Because there are some states that are saying, no, actually, we should be able to regulate these.
I think there's a very strong chance that this ends up at the Supreme Court, because it's already being litigated on a federal level and a state level in various courts. They've been battling back and forth. So Kalshi, which you mentioned, is the leading prediction market company right now, has most of the market share in that space. They have been fighting a legal battle all over the place. In some cases they've won. I think they've got more wins than losses at this point, but they have endured some losses in some cases. But I think because you have so many different varying opinions on this, legal opinions, a lot of folks think this is a classic case where the Supreme Court's going to have to decide it in the end.
Well, that caller we heard from talked about her grandson. We actually got this call from a 22-year-old. Listen.
Hi, my name is KD. I'm from Denver, Colorado, listening to the gambling episode. I'm 22 years old. Just wanted to say, sports gambling, especially on these mobile platforms like FanDuel, etc., is a huge problem. And there's unfortunately a little bit of a pipeline. I think something that's happened in the past is my generation has, not been interested at all in smoking, and then suddenly e-vapes, like Juul or whatever, pop up, and then they're like fruity flavored and they're all cool, and it's this new thing that has no seeming relation to the previous thing, smoking. It's just lipstick on a pig, though, right? And we get into it, and then it becomes a gateway into tobacco and nicotine addiction. I think the same sort of thing is happening with mobile gambling and prediction market platforms, whether it be Robinhood, Kalshi, Polymarket, or the sport betting ones. And I think it's particularly horrible for our youth. So really such a shame, but what can you do?
I was just talking to a teacher, by the way, the other day who said that Generation Alpha, which is like below Generation Z, the even younger ones, they're rebelling against the mobile culture. They don't like TikTok and all that, which is just kind of interesting to hear that caller there. But this is something that our other guest on the show, Charles Fane Lehman, brought up, which is that maybe the first step to regulating would be to get gambling off of phones, because it does cause these problems that caller just mentioned.
Well, certainly that would be something I think a lot of the watchdogs would want to see, but the sports books and the prediction market companies would fight that aggressively. They are going to view they're going to view this as basically a death blow to their business if it gets off the phone. So I don't think that's going to happen. If it does, then that would probably mean the end of it. But I will say the caller makes a very interesting point, which is, when you think about the history of cigarettes, for example, there was a period in which marketing cigarettes, for example, there was no restrictions really. And then eventually over time, people got really smart about understanding the effects of cigarettes and then understanding the effects of marketing. And then the government started to restrict marketing on those things such that you never see, of course, there aren't cigarette ads on TV. Now, we do see sports gambling ads on TV. Could, for example, there be some sort of action in Congress where they start to limit the ability to market this kind of thing? I do wonder if that could be where we're headed.
What has surprised you most about the moment we find ourselves in right now with gambling?
I think that this prediction market development is pretty surprising, because it was always sort of accepted before that, on a state-by-state basis, this was something that states could decide. But prediction markets are trying to go federal and basically make this legal everywhere. So think about, for example, California and Texas. California and Texas, sports betting is not legal in those states, the two biggest states in the country. Those would be, those are the white whales for the sports betting industry. If they could get it legal there, they would be absolutely exhilarated, but they haven't been able to do that. And so basically prediction markets are an end around, which allow them to start essentially offering effectively the same thing without the local license and saying, well, actually, we're just governed by the federal government now. Now, they're very careful not to call it betting. They'll call it trading. But from a user experience perspective, there's really not a lot of difference.
All right, well, in a moment, we're going to talk more about the prediction markets, and also we're going to hear from somebody who seems to bet with no problems, no issues. We'll be right back with Axios' Nathan Bomey. Welcome back to the follow-up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey. And Nathan, let's talk about the prediction markets like Kalshi and Polymarket, where you can bet on things like, and I looked this up today, when will Kevin Warsh become the Fed chair? Right now, 65% before June 1st on Kalshi. Or will Donald Trump visit Iran? 12% say yes before January 1st. Do you get a sense of who is betting on these? Is this professionals or just everyday people?
I think there's certainly a mix of both. And I think the biggest controversy is whether we're seeing insiders who have inside information doing the trading on these sorts of issues. So you mentioned Iran, for example. There have been accusations that, maybe some insiders with knowledge of what's happening with the military have capitalized on prediction markets by placing trades or bets based on what they know. When Nicolas Maduro was ousted from Venezuela, captured by the U.S. government. There was someone who placed an extremely well-timed bet or trade on Polymarket and made hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, could the person have gotten lucky? Certainly, but could it also have been someone who had, some timely information? Possible. But I think the trick is, and the challenge is it doesn't necessarily mean it was someone, say, in the military or in the government. Could have been the spouse of somebody. Could have been the friend of the spouse of somebody. Could have been someone who overheard something in a coffee shop. It's really hard to know, and I think that's what makes this very difficult to regulate.
Which is why, by the way, if they do pass laws or rules that say like politicians are not allowed to gamble on this stuff, it doesn't mean that their spouse couldn't, or their kid couldn't, or their neighbor couldn't. So there are
where are the restrictions? Right.
Exactly.
And, I know, like, if you go to one of these sports books, for example, if you are a family member of a casino employee, for example, sometimes there are restrictions on you. So could the government impose that sort of thing with prediction markets? It certainly seems possible, but the Trump administration so far has really let these companies grow. Now, they're doing that in the name of innovation, but again, I think there are a lot of consequences of this that I'm not sure we've really adequately confronted.
And are there things right now that you cannot bet on the prediction markets?
There are some things. So, for example, you can't, trade on whether someone's going to die or not, and that, is something that caused a lot of controversy because with the death of the supreme leader of Iran, there was controversy on Kalshi because they had a market about that person basically exiting office, and when he was killed, the market actually did not resolve to yes, meaning that the traders who believed that when he left office, that would qualify, when he died, that would qualify as leaving office, didn't really read closely the rules of the market, which stated that death did not qualify as leaving office. Very strange situation. Kalshi was insistent that they didn't do anything wrong. They said that they refunded all the bets. Nobody lost any money on any trades on those markets. But the point is that, the devil is in the details in these things. And although you can't technically bet on someone's death, that can be a complicating factor in a market like that.
We got a comment about the prediction markets on our voicemail. Listen to this.
Hello, my name is Sean from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I actually caught the show live driving on my way to a sports book to place a couple bets myself on a couple baseball games. I'm incredibly lucky in that my brain is just wired a particular way that I don't feel compelled. I'm all right with, 20, 30, 40 bucks or whatever on a game. So I see both sides of it. But what is becoming particularly pervasive and where I see people gambling where they would not gamble in the past is around this nihilistic feeling that society is kind of circling the drain. And that specifically relates to prediction markets. People that have that feeling that we're circling the drain or things are trending in a very bad direction, they hop in on prediction markets and they think, well, if these bad things are going to happen, I may as well go along for the ride and feel a little positivity along with it.
Interesting. Nathan, have you seen that in your reporting that people are like, oh, well, if this terrible thing's about to happen, I might as well make some money on it?
Well, I do think it can turn it into an unemotional sort of thing or change the way you look at it in the sense that, think about it like this. If, in 2028, if you want the Democrat to win the presidency, you could place a trade on the Republican winning so that if the Republican wins, you might be unhappy for the country, but at least you're happy for your pocketbook. Right. So in sports betting, this is actually an actual concept called emotional hedging, where you bet against your own team, and that way you win either way. But I certainly think there's some of that going on. I think it does cause people to think differently about things that previously were emotional. They maybe think a little bit more rationally about them, and that's why a lot of advocates would say prediction markets can provide extremely accurate information about the status of the market. Like in 2024, the prediction markets were always fairly confident that Trump would win, whereas the polls were close to 50-50. Why was there such a gap? Advocates of prediction market information would say that the prediction market people actually put their money behind it, and the people who put their money behind it were right in the end.
This is, by the way, not the only thing that you cover. You're a business reporter at Axios. How much of your time is spent covering this fast growing and changing industry?
A fair amount. In fact, actually today I was just interviewing the CEO of another prediction market company that's called NoVig. VIG is a term in the sports betting world which refers to the percent of your bet that the sportsbook effectively holds or takes in exchange for placing the bet. It's sort of a very simplistic way of describing it. But yeah, a fair amount, because this space is moving very rapidly. And you look at a company like Kalshi, which now has a market valuation greater than DraftKings, meaning that, you know, a company like DraftKings, one of the two main leaders in sports betting, is not as valuable as an upstart company like Kalshi that doesn't have nearly as much volume on its platform, but yet is clearly making some significant waves, suggesting that investors believe this is going to be really big.
Well, and you said the other day that one of the things about the prediction markets like Kalshi is that they take a fee right out of every bet. They're not actually the house. You're not betting against them, but they get money based on the amount of bets that people make.
Yes, and so the prediction market companies will say that what they're doing is facilitating peer-to-peer trading in the sense that they don't make money if you lose. Now, that's not really accurate, because they actually do. They make money if you lose or you win, because they are taking a percentage of it in the form of fees. But it is fair to say, though, that they aren't they don't benefit whether you lose a lot or not. So in the sense that the sports books, they need you to lose in the end for them to actually be profitable. And so what the anti-sportsbook people would say is that the sports books are preying upon people, and basically they will effectively reduce your chances to win. There are many cases in which the sports books have actively limited winners, meaning if you are someone who's clearly winning on the platform, you know what you're doing, you're succeeding, they are going to actively attempt to reduce your ability to win. And a lot of prediction markets would say that that's unfair and that they don't do that.
It was like the person in the casino coming over and being like, Mr. Papagiorgio, let me take you over to the restaurant. I think you've had enough here at the craps table.
Yes.
Let's get to one more caller who has a more holistic take involving the state of the economy.
Gary from Philadelphia. I just want to say that all of these are just more scams, more schemes for distributing hard-earned money from the working classes to the super rich, expanding already a very grotesque level of wealth inequality in this country, the kind that creates the ground for fascism, as we're now seeing, has to be stopped.
This is another thing, Nathan, that kind of came up in the live show, which is that it has become so difficult for so many people to make money the old-fashioned way with a job that they're looking for a way to make a quick buck. But in fact, they could also lose their money.
Yeah, I think, get-rich-quick schemes have always been something in America. It's always been something that it's taken one form or another. But I think that this has taken it to a whole new level, because what one of the earlier callers suggested, which is the fact that it's so easy to do on your smartphone. I mean, Jeremy, I feel like historians are going to look back on this era and point to the smartphone as the defining, what defined our culture. Because you think about even social media, for example. Before the smartphone, I think social media was a lot more harmless. And then once the smartphone came along, then I think that's when it started to dominate our lives. And I think it's somewhat similar here in the sense that sports betting was something you could do, but you had to make a lot of effort to do it beforehand. You could do it legally in Nevada, or you could do it illegally with like a bookie, for example. But you'd be doing it over the phone, and you probably couldn't. It took some effort. But here, it's so much easier. And I don't know, as a culture, if we've really adapted to how easy it is now.
All right. Well, so everybody that comes on the follow-up gets to make a prediction. This is kind of funny because now we're talking about predictions and betting. We're not betting on this, but you get to now make a prediction about anything you'd like.
All right, well, I am going to have to stay thematic and say that my Green Bay Packers will win the Super Bowl in 2027. Jordan Love leads the Packers to the Super Bowl. Now, whether I'm willing to bet on that or not is a whole other question, but I'm going to go ahead and say...
Are you going to bet against them so that you're happy either way?
This is a good idea, actually. I maybe do that. It'll soften the blow when they ultimately get eliminated.
All right. Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey. Nathan, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, guys.
And thanks for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced by Harrison Patino. If you like this podcast, share it with a friend and subscribe. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'll talk to you soon.